Well, who am I then? I've been recognized in many different media outlets as somebody who's a thought leader, and I influence companies in many ways, especially, of course, in pricing. And part of that is because of my new book, The Price Whisper. Buy it wherever you buy books from, online or in a brick and mortar store. Today, we're going to talk about how pricing selects your customers. What do I mean? What do I mean with that? Well, your pricing is part of the marketing mix, right? That's why pricing is part of the four P's of marketing. The others being product, place, and promotion. And the price itself sends a message of quality or benefit, or the lack of quality or benefit, right? So it's always a fact that some particular buyers in your market, whether it's a B2B market or a consumer market, is always going to be price sensitive. There are also going to be other segments of the market that are not price sensitive. And the problem here, my recommendation is always to focus on the not so price sensitive buyers, right? And there is a reason for that I will explain. And the like I said, the price itself is part of the marketing mix, and because it's part of the marketing mix, it has an influence on how buyers make their buying decision, right? And what this really means, if you like, is that if you in your company decides that you're going to be the low price leader, it doesn't matter if you're selling to consumers or B2B, but if you decide you're going to be the low price leader, a couple of things will happen. First of all, you will attract those price sensitive customers. And price sensitive customers have two flaws, right, from a overall corporate perspective. The first is that they bought your product or your service for the low price only, right? Or primarily for the low price. And if you sell something that have some kind of complexity to it, that is maybe that has some kind of complexity to it, it is likely that they are not going to spend the time, invest their own resources in fully understand your product or service, right? And because they don't fully understand it, as soon as something doesn't work as they expected, they're going to be in your how should I say? They're going to be in your on your customer service line. They're going to ask for support, and they are going to suck up your resource, right? This could be lots of resource in some cases. It may be less resource in other cases, but they're gonna take resource only for the single reason that they bought for the low price and not for the value. So they're not really vested in truly understand what you're saying. So chances are that you are going to spend a lot of your resource to train these people and support these people, or people, saying buyers to be more anonymous, so to speak, and then because they are price sensitive, as soon as there is a cheaper alternative, they will be gone. So all that effort and all that money and resource that you spent on keeping the price sensitive customer happy is going to be gone. You've done all this work for no value, right? The flip side, of course, is that buyers who buy your product or service for the particular value, for its differentiators, for its quality, and are willing to pay a higher price for that, because they vested so much of their resources into understanding your product or service, into maybe researching the alternatives they have and so forth, they will be more loyal. And again, because they invested so much of their resources into making the decision to buy your product or your service, they are going to continue to be willing to invest resources in actually understand how to use it, even if it's a complex product, right? And they will, for that reason alone, not spend as much time sucking up your customer support and customer service resources. So the value, obviously, of focusing on less price sensitive customers is twofold. First of all, you can charge higher prices, and that of course leads to higher profitability. You may have a lower sales volume, right? But at the end of the day, it is profits that drives every company. And if you have a smaller market share with happy customers that are willing to pay relatively higher prices, and you got a really good business, right? You got a very profitable business. And those more profitable customers, buyers, are not going to need so much resource as the price sensitive. And not only that, because they vested so much of their resources, of their time, to understand your product or your service, they're unlikely to switch, right? They're going to be more loyal to you. They feel that, okay, so here's a cheaper alternative, or here is a product that is marginally better, or whatever, and they're going to do in their head this very simple ROI calculation of, I spent so much money, or I spent so much resource on understanding this complex product or service, that that's to do it again for some marginal benefit with a competitor is not going to be something that is worthwhile doing. So they do the ROI for switching cost. Obviously, this happens in a blink of an eye when they are being presented with an alternative, and I don't really think that anybody sets themselves up in a spreadsheet and really try to understand the details. But it's all made by the limbic system as an emotion, right? So and I touched on profits, and the important thing with profits, of course, is that it drives every company. Now, as I speak to many CEOs, this appears to be unbeknownst to many, right? They say, yeah, profits are really good, right? We want more profits, and then they go out and they underprice their products, right? They say, what's more important for us is maximizing market share at low prices, but profits are important, right? You look at Amazon, right? They're public, so you can see that the obviously they have huge revenues. I can't remember what it is, 39 billion or thereabouts, and they have a resulting profit margin of 0.7%, right? It's still a lot of money because their revenues are so high, but few companies can live on profit margins that low, right? And profits obviously are important for the single reason that more profit gives you more resource for more product development, resource for more for more service definitions, resource for more market development, for more marketing, for more salespeople if that's how you work, for better websites, for more inventory if that's appropriate for your business, and it also, more profit gives you the ability to hire more and better people that are typically going to be more expensive, right? To drive all this additional product development and market development and so forth. So your price is defining who you are in the marketplace, right? It defines whether you are seeking price-sensitive customers. It defines if you are seeking value-based customers, those who specifically would appreciate your differentiators. And if you are looking for those price-sensitive customers, and there's kind of nothing wrong with that, it's just that it's a very different business model than seeking not so price-sensitive customers. And if you seek price-sensitive customers, your product or service is going to be either a commodity or something very close to a commodity, and you have to set up your company to deal with that, to deal with the understanding that you're going to have lots of churn in among your customers, understanding that you need to have a sort of a beefed up customer support line and put resource on that because you're going to need it, right? Whereas if you can focus on more customers that are looking for the unique value that you bring, you probably won't need all that resource for customer service and support. And you're going to have maybe a smaller sales volume, but you're going to have higher profit margins and profits in the end of the day also gives you the ability to select which strategy you want, right? If you it gives you the freedom to do certain things, whereas if you run a company with razor thin margins and you sell to price sensitive customers, your available choices are limited, right? So I want you to think about this and think about how you target your customers. And then, of course, it's very important to know what drives the price-sensitive customers more than price to buy, but is mostly price. More importantly is to understand what drives the not price-sensitive customers to buy. And it's partly price, of course, but it's the value that you bring, the specific features, functions, benefits, and so forth of your product or your service. All right, I hope you found this of some interest, and I'm looking forward to see you on the next time. Thank you very much.